Summon the Gods by Melinda Kucsera, Book 2 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy. Part 2, Chapter 5, Talking to Snakes. Who said that? Rosalie glanced around until a snake slithered out of the shadows beneath the nearest enchanted tree.
I did. I know why you're fading,
said the snake. Oh no, I remember a story about a woman and a snake, and it didn't end well for the woman. That was all she remembered about it, but that was enough to warn her off snakes. Rosalie scooted away from it, using her transparent hands.
This isn't that kind of story, and I'm not here to offer you an apple, just some advice.
The snake slithered closer. It was silver from its diamond-shaped head to its rattle-shaped tail, with gold eyes, and that just made it look sinister. No, thank you. Encounters between your kind and mine never end well. It's better if we go our separate ways and pretend this never happened. Rosalie signed up for time travel and demon fighting, but this was way beyond anything she thought she'd ever have to deal with on this trip.
Have it your way, but you'll disappear if you don't do something soon, and you'll probably end up in the gray between. That's where everyone goes when the universe doesn't know what to do with them. Who knows if you'll ever get out?
The snake slithered back into the shadows after delivering that ominous statement. How do you know that? Rosalie regretted asking that the moment the question popped out of her mouth, but it was too late and she needed the answer. This gray between place didn't sound like somewhere she wanted to go.
Look, let's get a few things straight. I'm not actually a snake. I'm not even on this plane of existence, so the only way I can talk to you is through this snake.
The snake poked its head out of the shadows to regard her with narrowed eyes, but it didn't return. I figured that much out on my own. Snakes don't talk, not even in an enchanted forest. Rosalie folded her arms, but they faded until they were transparent too.
That's debatable, but I didn't come here to talk about the magical creatures that share your world. You can find out about them on your own.
Then why did you come?
To point out the obvious. You're fading away because you're not born yet. I don't know how you got here, but you don't belong in this time and place.
That made a lot of sense, actually. Rosalie shifted her feet. They were still opaque, but for how long? I would have thought of it on my own. I didn't need a snake to tell me that.
Maybe you didn't. Maybe you would have thought of it, but now that you know, what are you going to do about it?
The snake slithered out of the shadows, but it stayed well away from her. I need to wake a Varian, and he needs to take me to another time when I'm actually born so I don't fade away. Rosalie couldn't think of anything else to do, so she tried to shake him, but her hands went right through him. Damn it. She called his name, but he still didn't wake.
That won't work. He's too drained to do anything, and you'll only make matters worse if you wake him up. Let him rest.
The snake bared its fangs. Then what do? I don't want to fade away and go to this gray place you just mentioned. Rosalie let her hands drop back to her sides.
I wouldn't have come and told you any of this if there wasn't another way. Give me some credit here. I might talk through a snake, but I'm a heck of a lot wiser than it'll ever be.
The snake shook its head. You still haven't told me what to do to fix this. Rosalie gestured to herself with her transparent hands.
I'm getting to that. Since you're a witch who's trying to walk both paths, you have two options, and both come with risks.
The snake lashed the ground with its tail. Since everything worth doing came with risks, that wasn't a surprise. What are my options? Tell me quickly before I fade so much I can't do anything. Rosalie glared at the snake. Why was it dragging things out?
Option 1. You can use blood magic to tie yourself to your time-walking friend.
The snake pointed at a Varian with its tail. Wait, why isn't he affected by this? We're close to the same age. If I'm not born yet, then he isn't either. Rosalie pointed at him.
No, he isn't, but his time travel magic protects him, and that rule really only applies to people who don't have that gift, like you.
The snake slithered closer. Oh, that also made sense. Why didn't I think of that? Rosalie hadn't thought about the risks of time travel, although she hadn't really cared what they were before those risks became an issue. You said there were two options? What's the other one? Because she didn't like the blood magic one. It might harm a Varian, and she didn't know if she could save the future without him. Failure was unacceptable and a little frightening if she was being honest with herself. Who are you? And how do you know I'm a witch?
Obviously I know because I'm one too. In fact, some consider me the first witch, but let's not argue semantics right now. You don't have the time. Your second option is trickier.
As the snake slithered closer, it undulated and bobbed its head, rhythmically, threatening to spellbind her. Rosalie blinked to break her fascination with the snake. I'll be the judge of that. What's the other option?
You need to gather the magical residue that his time travel spell left behind. You might see them as strings or glowing sigils or something else. It varies, depending on the witch. Once you have some, use it to bind yourself to his magic, so you stick around until you're born, or he takes you to another time, whichever comes first.
The snake coiled itself around a rock. The second option wouldn't work, because they were at least a mile, maybe more, from where they landed in this time, and she didn't see a single thread that was anything other than green in that spot. But Avarian didn't have earth magic, so those green strings didn't come from him. Whatever residue his time travel magic left behind was buried under the glowing strings dropped by the enchanted trees. So option 2 was out. That just left the more distasteful option. Will it harm him if I use blood magic on him? Rosalie reached under her sleeve for her dagger and relaxed when her hand closed around its reassuringly solid hilt. Either it faded with her, or the fading thing was inconsistent. I hoped it's not consistent, because that would give me an opening, and that's what she needed right now.
Does it matter? You're running out of time, and it sounds like this is your only option. I recommend you take it.
The snake rested its head on its coils. What about my mother? Is she alive in this time? Rosalie released the dagger. Could Mom help me? A lump formed in her throat just thinking about her mother. Where even was her mother? Rosalie didn't know what her mother did between leaving home at 17 and returning there almost 4 years later with a baby.
I don't know. I can try to find out, but you'd have to tell me about her. Even then, I'm not sure if I can locate her, but I'm willing to try, if you are.
The snake lifted its head. Why had she asked that question? Was there something she could do with that info? Rosalie couldn't think of anything. Her mom wasn't here, and technically, she wasn't her mom yet. I don't know where to find her, and even if I did know, I probably shouldn't go near her for fear of stopping the events that led to my birth. That left only one choice. Rosalie squared her shoulders and pulled a dagger from under her sleeve. How do I use blood magic to bind us so I stop fading?
First, you must slice your palm, then his. Then you hold his hand, palm to palm, and repeat after me. The circle binds us, witches to magic users, for we're both bled through life until we're dead. With my blood, I bind us until we're nothing more than magic threads.
It was a variation of the spell the witch under Mount Erdrin used to show her the magical disturbance. Mom would be angry if she saw me now, but she's not here. I am, and I'll see this through no matter what. Rosalie slashed her palm open, and pain welled up along with the blood. Before she could change her mind, she slashed Avarian's palm open and tried to grasp his hand. The dagger had no problem touching him, but her hand kept going through his. I hope this works. She was out of options if it didn't. How do I know if this is working? Her vision grayed at the edges. Rosalie didn't feel any different, but the world grayed out around her, and a gray fog rolled over Avarian and the litter. No, this wasn't supposed to happen. What's happening? Rosalie heard the dagger thud on the ground after it slid out of her hand, but the snake didn't answer. It didn't need to, because the fog subsumed everything around her. I think the spell failed. That meant she was in the gray place the snake mentioned. I'll bet that was its plan all along. Rosalie surveyed the gray between and headed for the white glow somewhere to her left, since there was nowhere else to go. Maybe, if she got lucky, that light would turn out to be the exit back to the mortal world. The old catechism ghosted back, along with bits and pieces she heard about the gray between, life and death. If that's where I am, it probably was because this foggy place looked like purgatory to her. Well, I'd better go see what that light is. Maybe it's something that can help me. Rosalie hiked toward it after one more glance at her non-existent surroundings. No one was anywhere in sight, so why did she feel like someone was watching her? It's your imagination. You always had an especially vivid one. Rosalie stormed off toward that light, and it grew larger with every step she took, and became strangely eye-shaped, with thick, glowing threads extending from its top and bottom. What is that thing? Chapter 6. In Angels We Trust. Rosalie slowed when a man in stained robes that were once white appeared in front of the giant eye-shaped light. Antennae sprouted from his head and green chitinous armor peeked through the burnt holes in his robe. Fiery wings arched out of his back in between the chitin. What is he? He didn't look like any creature Rosalie ever encountered, but nothing came to mind to identify him. The litany of allies, enemies, and other folk had nothing on this creepy guy. Since his back was to her, he didn't notice she stood stood perhaps 100 feet away, staring at him, and that was a good thing. Insect Guy raised his hands like he was casting a spell, and a second eye-shaped light appeared across from the first one. It extended glowing ropey things above and below it, like it was trying to anchor itself in place. What the hell am I looking at? A hand grasped her arm and turned her to face a tall, muscular woman in spotless white robes who also had wings, but her wings were pure white and made of feathers, not fire. The woman narrowed violet glowing eyes as she scanned her from head to toe.
What are you doing here?
Who are you? Rosalie tried to pull her arm free, but the woman had a firm grip.
I'm someone who's supposed to be here. I'll only ask you one more time, and then I'll toss you out on your rear if I don't like your answer. What are you doing here?
The woman shook her, and a lock of black hair escaped the high ponytail, keeping the rest of her black hair out of her angular face. Are you an angel? That would explain the wings and the gold circlet floating above the woman's head. At least the litany had a mention of this woman, and that put Rosalie on firmer ground, mentally speaking.
Of course I'm an angel. Why else would I be here if I wasn't? The gray between isn't a vacation spot.
The angel rolled her eyes heavenward. I don't know anything about this gray place other than that. I don't want to be here, but that's not important right now. I want to know what that is. Rosalie pointed at the man and the two giant eye-shaved lights as they faded. Where did they go?
I don't know. Maybe I should ask you that. Did you send them away?
The angel glared at her. No, I just saw them and wondered what they were. I didn't do anything. Rosalie tugged her arm, but she still couldn't break the angel's grip. Why did this angel think she had anything to do with whatever just happened?
Are you sure about that? You smell like a meddling human with magic.
The angel inhaled deeply, and it was disturbing to be sniffed that way. Magic users had a specific smell? That was new to Rosalie, but maybe that was something only an angel could sniff out. This angel certainly had a long nose, but it fit her features perfectly. Why are you here? That was the one question Rosalie needed answered more than the others.
I'm supposed to be here. The council ordered me to figure out what's distorting the gray between and map the distortions.
The angel shrugged like she received such orders all the time. What distortions? Rosalie glanced around. How could anyone tell what was supposed to be here and what wasn't when a thick gray fog covered everything?
That tableau that just disappeared is part of the distortions. Those eye-shaped lights with the squiggly glowing lines keep appearing and disappearing. Sometimes people hack away at the squiggly things, but they're just shadows, and they fade away before I can ask them any questions. It's damned annoying.
The angel folded her arms and scowled at the spot where the lights and the insectoid man were. But she let go of Rosalie, so she rubbed her arm. Damn, that angel had a tight grip. Do you have any theories about what's causing these distortions? Have they ever happened before?
Obviously, I don't, or I wouldn't still be here.
The angel threw her hands in the air.
But this is off topic. Who are you? Why are you here? And where do you belong? Because you don't belong here.
Maybe if she told the angel her name, then the angel would give hers. It was worth a try. Rosalie couldn't remember any stories where someone gave their name to an angel and it ended badly, so she was pretty certain there wasn't any risk to giving that information out. Besides, it might gain her some information in return, and she needed that badly. I'm Rosalie, and for what it's worth, I ended up here by accident. Rosalie extended her hand to be polite. The angel grasped it.
I'm Thaniel, and I suppose I could cut you some slack, but that all depends on how you ended up here by accident. People don't normally do that, so you'll forgive my skepticism. Why don't you tell me what happened?
The angel held on to her hand. How could she explain without sounding like she was insane? Would the angel know if she lied? Probably, and that would just get her in even more hot water than she was in now. Perhaps honesty was the best policy. Rosalie took a deep breath, counted to 10, and let it out. Then she told the angel everything.
That's a strange story.
Thaniel paced as she considered all Rosalie told her. That's all you have to say? Rosalie tapped her foot, but it made no sound. Perhaps the fog muffled it.
I'm still thinking about what you said. It's unbelievable. You know that, right?
Thaniel glanced at her over her shoulder. Yeah, I know how it sounds, but I'm not crazy. Everything I told you is exactly what I experienced. Rosalie hoped Thaniel would believe her.
I never said you were. Although I'm having some doubts about your sanity since you talked to a snake, and you know how that turned out for humans the last time someone trusted its advice.
Yes, I know that. But the snake was right. I took too long to take their advice and I ended up in the gray between. Rosalie hunched her shoulders. Fear clawed at her. What if she couldn't go back? Was Avarian okay? She left him tied to a litter in the middle of the enchanted forest. At least no one could hurt him. The trees would attack anyone who tried. But there were a lot of things that could happen that the trees wouldn't do anything about. What if that snake bit him? What about Ran and Mirren? She left them in the middle of an invasion. I wonder what Ran's doing right now. I hope he and Mirren are safe. Rosalie wrung her hands like her grandmother used to do when she was worried.
Just because the snake was right doesn't mean it doesn't have an agenda. I'd be careful if I were you.
Daniel said darkly. It's hard to do that when I'm stuck here. Rosalie suppressed a sigh.
You're not stuck here. I'm about to throw you out. You should land back in the mortal world, roughly where you left it, I think. But I'm not actually sure because I don't really understand the time difference between the mortal world and this place. I just know it exists. But you'll find out all about that. If we ever run into each other again, you can tell me. I can't promise I'll listen, though.
Daniel grabbed her arm again and dragged her through the fog toward nothing, because there was nothing except an endless plain covered in fog. What are you talking about? What time difference? Rosalie dug her heels in, but that didn't stop the angel. How could there even be a time difference? Rosalie wished something would make sense, but nothing did, since Avarian took her to that giant glowing arrow.
I already said I don't understand it, so obviously I can't explain it to you. I just know that time exists here, but it moves slower here than it does in the mortal world. Don't ask me why, because I don't know. I never cared to find out because I'm immortal and time doesn't actually mean anything to me. I'm not sure I would have understood the explanation anyway.
Daniel strode onward as if Rosalie's struggles weren't affecting her one bit. You're awfully talkative. Are all angels this talkative? Rosalie gave up and followed the angel. Daniel had a grip like an iron vice, and she probably wouldn't let go until they reached their destination. But Rosalie still saw only fog for miles in all directions. Did Daniel see something else? She must, because she turned left and marched in a straight line toward more fog.
Some are and some aren't. We're not all that different from you humans in that regard, but we live in heaven and you don't. Of course, there's more to it than that. We have more rules than you do and more power, but that's it, really.
Daniel shrugged, then turned a sharp right, as if she were going around something other than the ankle-deep fog bank they trekked through. Are all angels as rude as you? Rosalie had to ask that, since Daniel was rather abrupt, and the angels in the religious stories weren't. But they never seemed real, and Daniel definitely was.
I'm not rude. I'm direct. There's a difference. Would you rather I talk in circles and confuse you? Because I can do that. But I've always preferred plain speech over pretty words. If you want pretty words and empty platitudes, then you should have talked to that guy with flaming wings. He reminds me of a guardian angel I knew, but he doesn't appear long enough for me to confront him and find out if he is actually that angel.
Daniel swung another hard left into more featureless fog. So you couldn't talk to him at all? That wasn't good news. How could they find out what he was doing if they couldn't talk to him? Rosalie stumbled up an incline as the fog parted.
Exactly. I've shouted questions at him, but he either ignores me or he can't hear me.
Daniel hiked like the incline was flat, not pitched at a steep angle with slippery sand underfoot and a few sprigs of grass here and there for color. Did you try grabbing him for a chat? Rosalie slipped, but Daniel hauled her up until she could dig her toes into the sandy hillside again.
Loads of times, but my hand goes right through him like he's a ghost or a shadow of things to come.
Daniel shrugged that off like it wasn't important when it clearly was. You don't have any idea what those eye-shaped lights are? Surely Thaniel could ask another angel. She mentioned a council. Rosalie slid backward, but Thaniel rested her fall again and set her feet back on the steep hill.
I don't know, but they're definitely something magical. I can feel their magical aura. I just don't know what they're doing or why they keep appearing in the gray between. Magical things aren't supposed to happen here.
Thaniel summited the hill and surveyed whatever was on the other side. Where are they supposed to happen? Rosalie stumbled up the last few feet onto the summit, and she gasped as a white sandy beach spread out below. Waves rolled ashore, and a ship sailed on the hammered metal sea. She couldn't remember any tales about this part of the gray between.
Magical things are supposed to only happen on Earth, of course, but this is the end of the line for you.
Daniel shoved Rosalie toward a vertical rainbow, and she fell toward God knew what. But deep down, she was sure she'd just found an important piece of the puzzle. She just didn't know where to fit it in with the other pieces. But I'll figure that out, and I'll restore the correct version of the future. Then you and I, Mom, are having a long talk about everything. That was the last thing she thought before the rainbow brightened to white and blinded her.
Chapter 7. Mind-Altering Things. Garen whistled as he strode through the outskirts of the city like a conquering hero. Of course, he ignored the sky since it still couldn't decide if it was day or night, but that was a small matter he could order someone to rectify once he ousted the current Prince of Hell. Garen breathed in the sulfur-tinctured air as he glanced around for the throngs of admirers who should be cheering his triumphant return from battle, till he remembered he didn't conquer anything in hell yet. That was a disappointing revelation, but one he'd rectify soon. No army followed where he led, not yet anyway, but he'd claim the rebel army and lead them to conquer this city. It was only a matter of time, and that was an encouraging thought. Garen strolled past shuttered shops and tried to tone down his imagination so he'd stop confusing this trek through the city with other ones. It was hard, but he could do hard things. After all, he snuck into the Library of Forbidden Knowledge and stole a valuable artifact from it, right under the nose of a fallen angel. If he could do that, then he could do anything, despite not having his powers. That was just a small inconvenience, now that he had the Book of Names and its knowledge of every creature's true name. He just needed to speak, and the creatures who crossed his path would fall at his feet. They might even worship him, if he played his cards right. Too bad no one shared the street with them. Wait a minute, that's not what I'm here for.
What are you doing? You're strutting around like you just won something, but you didn't win anything.
Antali elbowed him in the side to get his attention. In a way, I won something. Garen smiled. When he stole the Book of Names, he didn't know how powerful it was, but he knew now, and he'd fetch its creator to keep it happy.
Why are you whistling? You're drawing attention to us, but we're trying to keep a low profile, remember?
Natali glared up at him as their gray robes and veil billowed in the breeze. That was true. He momentarily forgot himself and his mission, but did they really need to keep a low profile? Nobody in the city would warn anybody at the library, and no one knew that was their destination, or what they planned.
I broke you out of the spire, remember? They must have noticed by now and may have sent guards to look for you. After all, it wouldn't be hard to guess where we went or who helped you.
Natali was probably right. I remember that, but I won't creep around either. That would make us even more suspicious than we already are. Memories of their escape and his dumb decision to double-cross the Versailles smacked him upside the head and knocked some sense into him. I need to get my head out of the past and focus on the future. Garen rubbed his face. He still needed a plan to kidnap a fallen angel of unknown power, but it was hard to concentrate on that when memories of other marches through other cities kept pulling him back to the triumphant victories of the past. Maybe that lack would have bothered him if he were any other man, but he had enough of a plan to get started, and that's all he'd ever had. I've won battles on less. Besides, plans are overrated. I'll just make things up as I go along. The buildings on both sides of the street grew taller as the streets widened. Were they nearing the center of the city? He didn't see a palace, and he was pretty sure the adversary had one. After all, the Prince of Fallen Angels needed somewhere to park his ego. Where were the city's inhabitants? Were they all hunkered down somewhere? Or did the city empty when the gateway opened because all the demons left through it? Was there a battle between them and the inhabitants of wherever they went in progress right now? Could he join it? Garen stopped in the middle of the street as that question seized him and ran away with his imagination. A certain part of him grew hard just thinking about that battle, and he wiped drool from the corners of his mouth. He could almost smell the coppery scent of blood, hear the crash of metal on metal, and taste the ashes on the wind. I could lead the defenders in battle against the demons, and it would be glorious. As he imagined cutting down demons with flaming swords, his hands opened and closed reflexively at his sides. That distant battle called to him. The rebels didn't need him, but the people living on the other side of that gateway did. Where's the gateway? Garen scanned the street for it. He didn't need to claim a rebel army in hell when there were people fighting demons for their lives and livelihoods elsewhere. Unfortunately, that gateway was the only way to reach them, since he couldn't teleport anymore.
Oh no, we're not going anywhere near that thing. The temptation was too much for you when we were more than a mile away from it, it. I won't let you get any closer to it than that.
Until he shook their fist at him. But you know where it is, right? Garen still didn't see so much as a stray light beam from that damned gateway. But it must be here somewhere. He felt the conflict on its other side.
I might know that, but even if I did, I won't tell you until after you keep your promise. Now come along and stop making a scene.
And Tali strode on, forcing him to follow, since they knew where the gateway was. Shouldn't we pass by and see what's happening at the gateway? We could use that information. Garen pulled the Versace to a stop near a cart full of prickly vegetables.
How would we use that information? If you can give me one good reason why we need to see what's happening with the gateway, then maybe I'll change my mind.
And Tali folded their arms. Garen lowered his voice so no one would overhear his reason, even though no one was around. But not all demons chose to have corporeal bodies. Some preferred to float about as disembodied spirits, either to collect information or to steal energy, emotions, dreams, or thoughts from the unwary. And he had a damned good reason for going to the gateway too. But if anyone outside of them found out, his fledgling plan would fail. And that was unacceptable. We could tell the fallen angel who runs the library what we find out about it. Maybe that information will convince him to come out where we can grab him. Logic abandoned all who entered the library of forbidden knowledge. The damned place twisted reality to suit itself in ways that grated on his nerves during his first visit, and he wanted that to be his only one. Besides, that place was a maze. Finding one fallen angel within it would be difficult, time-consuming, and just plain annoying, and Garen would love to skip that entirely. Battle called to him, and it didn't involve going anywhere near that blasted library or its keeper, but he kept that to himself, because Natalie would try to stop him if they knew what he was plotting. It's not my fault. Really, I'm an ex-war god. I'm supposed to fight wars, not sneaking into libraries. All that sneaking around he did for the sleeping angel was demeaning. Let someone else roust Ardenil from his library. The book of names fluttered its wings. It must have heard him thinking about its maker. Damn, what would the book do when he approached the gateway? Would it tear itself free and fly back to its maker? Or worse, would it find a new flunky to carry it?
That's not a bad idea, actually.
And Tali looked at him with respect. That was unexpected, and would make the rest of their journey easier but less entertaining if they weren't constantly at odds. Did he want that? He liked matching wits with the Versace, so no, he didn't want things to be easier. I could tell them what I'm thinking right now. That would make things harder in a hurry. Nah, he'd find something else to fight with them over, just to keep things interesting. But Garen didn't say that aloud. He'd let Tali think they were on friendlier terms, for now. Then, lead the way. Garen gestured for the Versace to precede him.
If I'm not mistaken, the gateway is this way.
And Tali turned down a narrow alley, then another and another. Garen was thoroughly lost by the fourth turn. Thankfully, he never needed to come back this way, so he didn't need to know how they found the gateway. Since the sky was changing back and forth between darkness and burning daylight at regular intervals, it took them 60 such changes before they turned a bend into a four-way intersection. There stood the gateway all right, but it looked weird. Before he could figure out what was different about it, Nantali pulled him behind a pile of rubble created by the gateway's violent opening.
Get down, you fool.
Nantali yanked him down into a crouch beside them. Why do we need to hide? It went against the grain for him, and Garen fought the urge to stand up and see what startled the petite Versace. Hiding was for tricksters. He preferred to bash in the brains of his opponents in plain sight.
You fool, don't you see 3 fallen angels over there?
Where do you see that? Garen peered over the broken masonry and shards of furniture, and his mouth dropped open in shock. The gateway shuddered, then split into 3 gateways that were all the same size. The 2 new gateways stacked up behind the original one, so they stood in a line like glowing, eye-shaped dominoes. What the hell am I looking at? Garen didn't know anything else about gateways except what everyone knew. They were magical tunnels that bored through every realm between their terminuses, but they were usually more stable than this. He cursed himself for missing his one shot at crossing through the gateway unharmed. No way would he risk it now, with the gateway splitting into 3 copies of itself, then collapsing back into 1 copy happy again. Nope, he valued his hide too much to risk it on an unstable gateway, even if it offered a way out of hell, and a one-way ticket to a war against demons. What are they doing? Garen asked, to cover the fact that he still didn't see the fallen angels anywhere. But he also couldn't take his eyes off the gateway, and they weren't standing in front of it.
They're right there.
And Tali pointed again.
Don't you see them? I think they're discussing something.
They're probably talking about the best way to invade whatever is on the other side of that gateway. That was just a guess, but that's what he would talk about if he stood with them, and he wasn't ashamed of that. But he was a general without an army to command. Garen stared at the gateway as it split into 3 again. Why does it keep doing that? There was a war in progress on the other side of those gateways, but which one led to that war?
What are you doing?
And Tali grabbed his hand, and all his energy drained away. Garen collapsed into a heap of elbows and knees beside the scowling Versati. Hell couldn't take the war out of him, but the Versati could drain him to the point where he couldn't fight anything.
What do we do now? We can't get any closer, or they'll see us.
And Tali never even glanced at him. They kept their eyes on the fallen angels. Why is that a problem? Maybe it was the energy loss, but Garen couldn't understand that. Part of him wanted to tangle with one of the fallen angels, just to see if he could best them, but there was probably a good reason not to do that. He just couldn't think of one right now.
They're fallen angels, you fool. That makes them the most powerful beings in this realm.
And Tali shook their head at his confusion. So what? Garen was tired of hiding and running and not being the one in charge. He rose and would have strolled over to find out what those fallen angels were doing and maybe thrown a punch at them, but Naphtali tackled him to the ground. Why did you do that?
Because something is screwing with your head. You can't take on a fallen angel, not without your powers. Even then, who knows if you'd be enough?
That was true. With Untali pressing him into the ground, some of the madness left his mind, and all thoughts of testing his strength against the fallen angels cleared away. What was I just thinking? I can't fight a fallen angel. Not in this condition. The last time he fought an angel, he lost badly. Hence for stopping me. I don't know what I was thinking. Garen tried to escape Naphtali's hold.
It's that damn gateway. It's putting weird thoughts in your head again. I told you we shouldn't have gone near it.
And Tali slid off him and shook their head. Maybe the Versati was right. If so, they should get away from the gateway as quickly as possible before he did something he regretted that landed him either in the spire or in pieces. Maybe Tali should make the decisions until they put some distance between them and the gateway. You're right. Can we get away from here without them seeing us? I don't dare look at the gateway or at them for fear that it'll mess with my head again. Garen closed his eyes as he sat up, just to be on the safe side. He didn't like anything that messed with his head.
Don't worry, I'll be your eyes. Maybe you ought to keep yours closed just in case.
And Tali must have risen because rocks crunched under their feet. Hopefully they were scanning the area. It wasn't a bad idea. Garen shifted into a crouch and squeezed his eyes closed. That gateway wouldn't mess with his head anymore. I hate mind magic. That was the one type of magic that he had difficulty countering even before he lost most of his magic.
There's a damned army coming this way. We need to get out of here now.
Chapter 8. Deceived and glamored. Light filled Arginil. Maybe his wish would be granted, and he'd become the light he saw sparkling on the waves so long ago. Maybe, but he doubted hell would let him leave. A blinding light shined down on him, and every part of him warmed and tingled. But he didn't feel like he was disintegrating or splitting apart, or whatever happened when angels ended their existence. What's happening to me? Even as he thought that he knew, he hadn't experienced this in so long that it took him a moment to recognize it. Someone was healing him. But that isn't possible. Only another angel could do that, but not one in hell, unless they still had some divine light left in them, because that's what filled him now, the light of the Creator, and it restored everything it touched. Who healed me? When the light faded, Arginil opened his eyes and stared straight into the glowing violet eyes of another angel. That wasn't a shock, though, because he expected that. He just didn't expect the angel grinning down at him like a loon.
Well, hello there. Welcome back.
said the last angel he expected to see.
You look confused.
Daniel patted his cheek.
Don't worry, I've almost got things sorted. You just lie there and let me fix things.
She winked at him. You fix things? You're not the most patient angel in heaven unless things have changed. Arjaniel closed his eyes. He must be seeing things. Thaniel couldn't possibly be in hell healing him. That just wasn't possible.
Some things have changed because that's what happens over time. Nothing stays exactly the same. Everything changes eventually, even if it's only a little.
So you're telling me that you became patient during all that time? He didn't believe it. The Thaniel he knew couldn't have changed that much.
For my friends, I have all the patience in the world, but not so much for other beings. Thankfully, my job doesn't require patience.
Daniel might have finished healing him, but she left her aura on full blast, and the light threatened to blind him. Arjaniel shielded his eyes as he laughed at her self-deception. It felt good to laugh. It warmed his cold, dead heart in a way that nothing had in a long time. How can you be here? I'm in hell! Or he was before he passed out, but who knew where he was right now? He couldn't see anything until Thaniel toned down her aura. She was blindingly bright, but she wasn't an archangel.
I go where I want.
Daniel's silhouette shrugged. Az said the same thing. Are you an archangel now? Arjaniel squinted at her.
Of course. So are you, and Azariah, and a bunch of other angels you once knew. But maybe you forgot how all angels start out at the lowest level, and over time, we become more powerful as we climb up the ranks.
She patted his cheek again like he was a child who forgot his lessons. I knew that, and he knew he was an archangel. He had the power level of 1 before he spent it all, and now he felt that power inside him again. You refilled my power?
Yeah, that's part of healing. You sure you're feeling okay? You're sure are asking a lot of questions you should already know the answer to.
Daniel's silhouette played with the ends of her hair. At least he hoped that's what she was doing, but it was hard to tell while surrounded by white, gold, and violet light. I don't know. Why are you here? Arjaniel glanced away to save his sight, since he might need to see something that wasn't as blinding as the sun sometime soon.
You could thank me. That's usually what happens after I help someone.
Daniel sounded like she was pouting, but he didn't risk his eyesight to check. Thank you for healing me. But why did you come here at all? Hell wasn't anyone's idea of a vacation spot. Although Thaniel was rather unorthodox for an angel, he still couldn't think of a reason for her to visit. But something must have drawn her here. Maybe it was that gateway he failed to take down.
I overheard Azrael talking about you, and he said something about a library and some demons. Since my last assignment ended rather strangely, and the council didn't particularly like what I had to say, I thought I'd take a break from heaven and check out his story. Aren't you glad I did?
Of course I am, but it warmed his heart that she came and helped him, even if it was out of boredom. What was your last assignment?
Oh, you know, they wanted to get me out of their hair, so they sent me to the gray between to map out some distortions and, if possible, find the source. I brought them my findings and they didn't like them.
She spoke like that was no big deal, but it sounded like a big deal to him. What did you find? Arjaniel risked a glance at her, but she didn't turn down her aura, so his eyes teared until he covered them with his hands. Azrael said the gateway went to the gray between. Could that have something to do with the disturbances that the council sent Thaniel to investigate? In his mind, the two must be related.
That's the interesting bit. Do you mind if I sit?
No, go ahead. But could you turn down your aura? You're blinding me. Arjaniel parted his fingers and suppressed a sigh when he wasn't blinded. The bed dipped as Thaniel sat on the edge.
Well, it went something like this.
She launched into the most unbelievable story he'd ever heard, but he believed it. It was too wild not to be true. Arjaniel sat up. We must close that gateway. Maybe he could now. He had his full power back. Thaniel had hers, and she was searching for something to do. That was the real reason she came down here. She was bored.
We could do that, but I was hoping we could fight some demons, or better yet, some fallen angels. Do you have some you need me to clobber? Because I brought my hammer.
Thaniel extended her hand, and a war hammer appeared. Thaniel plucked it out of the air and gave it an experimental swing. coming. Arginil leaned away from the hammer. Don't you want to clobber me? I'm a fallen angel.
Are you, though?
As Thaniel studied him, her extra-large hammer disappeared from her hands so she could toy with the ponytail holding her dark hair out of her face. Arginil tried not to show his relief when the hammer disappeared. Azrael asked the same thing. Why was everybody questioning his status? Arginil swung his legs over the opposite side of the bed from where Thaniel sat. Gold light still fell in his eyes as he rose to investigate where it came from. Where's it coming from? He looked up, but there was no light fixture on the ceiling. Not in his tower room, because he didn't need it. His eyes glowed all the time, providing all the light he needed to see. So what if it was violet? Where's that gold light coming from?
That's your halo, dummy. It's supposed to float over your head. It only drops down and it encircles your neck like a golden collar if you're a fallen angel.
Daniel pantomimed that even though he knew what she meant, every fallen angel he'd run into had a halo around his neck like a golden choker, because that's how they saw their angelic nature. To them, it was a prison. Why is mine floating above my head? I fell a long time ago. Arginil reached up and touched the halo. Thaniel was right. It floated above his head like it had before he fell, but it shouldn't do that.
Because you're not fallen. I thought that would have been obvious, but you were under a really strong glamour, so maybe you forgot.
Thaniel shrugged. What glamour? Arginil glanced down at himself. His robes were white, not the ashy gray he was used to seeing, and his toenails were short, not long, and curving like talons. He almost didn't recognize his feet.
Didn't you create it?
Daniel waved her hands, and an image floated in front of him of a fallen angel with long gray talon-like nails on his hands and feet. Dark hair that was an unkept, knotted, and tangled mess tumbled down his back. Sooty wings arched over him, and a golden collar wrapped around his neck. That was the version of himself he was used to seeing.
You really believed it, didn't you? You thought you looked like that.
Daniel grasped his shoulders and turned him to face a mirror on his wall. The angel that stared back at him still had dark hair, but someone had combed it, and a luminous halo floated over his head. His wings were as snowy white as Thaniel's, and the scars left by molten tears running down his face over the years were gone, leaving unblemished tan skin behind. This can't be real. Arginil touched the mirror, and his reflection reached out to touch him. I can't possibly look exactly as I did before I fell. This is some trick or illusion, and it was a cruel one at that.
No, it's not. This is me. Do you think I could put together such an elaborate illusion? That takes finesse, and I'm more of a hammer girl. Get me something you need hammered, and I'm your angel. But I don't do illusions.
Danielle threw back her head and laughed at the very idea. It was pretty preposterous. Even he must admit that. She wasn't patient enough to piece together such an elaborate illusion, but someone had. Who did this to me? How did they convince me to believe it? But I fell. Arginil sank onto the bed in shock. For a moment, he was back in heaven, looking down that dark tunnel to hell. Then he fell. But no one pushed him. He jumped, because down there was where he thought he belonged. Was I wrong? Was I not damned at all? Daniel sat beside him and wrapped an arm around his shaking shoulders.
It was a confusing time.
She squeezed his shoulders. Why did you really come? You couldn't have known any of this before you came. He couldn't say it. It was just too big, and he'd never been good at handling emotions. I always ran from them in the past.
Like I said, I overheard Azrael talking about you, and I want to see what.
Does Azariah know? Arginil couldn't finish that question either. Lots of emotions welled up besides shock. Some he didn't even have names for, and he wanted to run away and hide from them, but he didn't know if his legs would hold him up.
I don't think so. He wasn't there when Az told his story, but Az likes to boast about his exploits, so word will reach him eventually.
She squeezed his shoulders again. That's really why you came. Arginil closed his eyes. He wanted Azariah to come, but he wanted him to stay away too. He was so torn and confused right now.
That's part of it. I also wanted to see you again. You were my friend. I wanted to see if you still are.
Daniel let go, and he was like a piece of driftwood lost in a sea of emotions. Perhaps he could cling to that friendship, and that might be the rock he needed right now. Arginil nodded. I'll always be your friend.
Great. So how about we clobber some demons now? That always cheers me up.
Daniel bounced to her feet and summoned her hammer again. Please don't harm any of the demons that work for me. He couldn't believe he'd just said that. But it was true. He'd taken in a growing number of demons over his long stay here, and they kept the library protected and organized.
Of course not. Friends don't go around clobbering their friends' employees.
Daniel flounced to the windows overlooking the walls of the library and the rocky plain between it and the city.
I don't think we'll need to go looking for demons to clobber. You've got a nice collection of them on your doorstep.
What do you see? Arginil tried to rise, but he sat back down again, because the shock hadn't worn off yet, and he was still shaken to his core.
A large group headed this way. At least I think that's what I'm looking at. I can just see the dust cloud they're kicking up, but it's the right size to hide the kind of trouble I came here to find.
Daniel glanced at him over her muscular shoulder and grinned.
Shall we go down to meet it?
You've been listening to Part 2 of Summon the Gods, Book 2 of the Rogue Gods Trilogy by Melinda Kucsera. Subscribe to the channel so you'll be notified when the sequel publishes. The Rogue Gods Trilogy is available as an ebook and paperback, and now a full-cast audiobook. Click the link in the description to order your copy. If you love the Rogue Gods Trilogy, then you'll love Melinda's other epic fantasy adventure books too. They're just as full of magic and mayhem and characters who will do anything to achieve their goals. Check them out at the link in the description, and while you're there, sign up for her newsletter so her characters can talk directly to you. Thank you for listening.